My name is Ethan Porter, and I'm 32 years old. I've always prided myself on being level-headed and rational, even when life throws its most inexplicable curveballs my way. That autumn weekend, I decided to escape the suffocating hum of the city with a group of close friends. We set our sights on Turkey Run State Park in Indiana, a place with a rugged reputation and eerie local legends. I never imagined that a simple RV camping trip would become a descent into a waking nightmare. The journey began with a hopeful sense of adventure. I had spent months planning this getaway, convinced that reconnecting with nature would help me put the remnants of a painful breakup behind me. Our group was a motley crew of personalities. Mia Turner, whose sensitivity to the world around her was both a gift and a burden. Derek Collins, a daredevil whose impulsiveness often bordered on recklessness. Olivia Reyes, the quiet skeptic whose logic provided a counterbalance to our more emotional impulses. And Lucas Bennett, the seasoned outdoorsman and owner of our battered but trusty RV, whose eyes held secrets of past horrors that he'd never fully disclosed. Driving through the winding roads of Indiana, the crisp air and vibrant foliage filled me with a quiet optimism. Turkey Run's promise of serene wilderness quickly became tangible as we arrived at a clearing dotted with ancient trees and a forgotten logging trail that whispered of past tragedies. Our RV, parked in a modest clearing, near a cluster of weathered pines, looked like a sanctuary, a haven from the relentless urban grind. We unloaded our gear, and for a moment, all of us shared a silent understanding. This trip was our escape. The first evening, as dusk draped itself over the park, we gathered around the RV's small table, sharing laughs and tentative plans for the days ahead. Lucas, ever the practical one, reminded us to check our equipment before nightfall, but fate seemed to have its own agenda. Barely an hour after we settled in, the RV's generator sputtered and died, leaving us stranded in an encroaching darkness and an unexpected chill. We scrambled for extra blankets and flashlights, our nerves beginning to fray as the temperature dropped and the silence of the forest turned oppressive. It wasn't long before the strange began to intrude upon the normalcy of our camp. I remember sitting on the edge of a creaking wooden bench outside the RV, trying to focus on the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. Then I heard it, a distant, almost playful giggle that shouldn't have been there. It was soft at first, like a whisper carried on the breeze, but it soon grew in clarity, echoing in a way that sent shivers down my spine. I glanced around, my eyes scanning the darkness, but nothing was visible. Mia's eyes, wide with an unspoken fear, met mine. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling just enough to betray her anxiety. Derek, ever the cavalier, laughed it off. "It's just the wind playing tricks on you, Mia. Come on, let's check out the generator. Maybe we can fix it." But even his tone carried an undercurrent of uncertainty, and I knew that this was only the beginning. As we fumbled with the generator, a sudden gust of wind slammed open the RV's door. When we peered inside, we discovered something inexplicable. A series of small, delicate footprints pressed into the dust near the window, as if made by a child. On the glass itself were faint handprints, inexplicably smeared from the inside out. The RV suddenly felt claustrophobic, as if the very air was thick with a presence that we could neither see nor understand. I tried to steady my racing heart as we returned to our seats inside the RV, the incident fueling a palpable tension in the cramped space. Mia's intuition screamed that something was terribly wrong, but Olivia's logical mind urged caution. "There's got to be a rational explanation for all this," Olivia insisted, her tone clipped and measured. "Maybe some local kid is playing a prank." But Lucas, who had remained mostly silent since our arrival, just shook his head. "This isn't the first time I've seen signs like this in these parts," he murmured, eyes darkening with memories best left unspoken. The night dragged on with a sense of looming dread, the eerie laughter and whispered voices blending with the howling wind outside. Our group's bonds, already frayed by the generator's failure and the chill that seeped into our bones, began to crack further under the strain. Derek's usual bravado gave way to ill-timed quips, and even his typical laughter sounded hollow. Mia's persistent warnings about a feeling of impending doom were met with weary skepticism by Olivia, who insisted that stress was making us all imagine things. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. When dawn finally broke, its weak light barely piercing the heavy gloom that still clung to our camp, we decided it was time to salvage the trip. Lucas, determined to make the best of a bad situation, suggested we try to repair the generator before setting out on our planned hike along a lesser-known logging trail rumored to hold secrets of the past. The trail was said to meander near an abandoned cabin, a relic of an era when local folklore held more sway over the people than modern rationality. It was a long shot, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The morning brought with it heavy rain, a downpour that washed over the park like a sudden deluge. Our attempts at fixing the generator were thwarted by a malfunction in our navigation system, which blinked erratically and lost all signal amid the storm. The RV's interior, once our safe haven, now felt like a trap. The windows we had already seen mysterious handprints on now bore streaks of rain and what looked disturbingly like fresh smudges. As we huddled together trying to map out our next steps, group tensions began to mount. "I don't like this at all," Mia said softly, her eyes reflecting a mix of fear and resignation as she clutched her rain-soaked jacket close to her. "We should leave while we still can." But Derek, his face streaked with rain and defiance, snapped back, "We can't just run at the first sign of trouble, Mia. We're here to experience something real, to prove that these old legends aren't just made-up ghost stories." His tone, though forceful, trembled with an emotion he wouldn't admit even to himself. I found myself torn between Derek's reckless courage and Mia's instinctual warnings. Olivia's steady voice intervened. "We need to keep our heads clear. Let's investigate the abandoned cabin. It might give us answers, or at the very least some historical context that can explain these bizarre happenings." Lucas, looking more haunted than ever, hesitated before adding, "I've heard stories about that cabin, stories that I wish I could forget." His words, heavy with unspoken pain, lent an ominous weight to the decision. Despite the torrential rain and our failing equipment, we resolved to venture out. Drenched and disoriented by the malfunctioning GPS, we followed Lucas's directions through narrow, overgrown paths that wound deeper into the forest. Every step felt like a descent into a labyrinth of shadows, the world around us growing stranger with every passing moment. The sound of the rain was a constant, almost oppressive drumbeat, punctuated by the occasional, inexplicable echo of a child's laughter that sent a chill through my already numbed senses. After what felt like hours, we finally arrived at the outskirts of the cabin. Hidden behind a dense wall of ivy and gnarled branches, the structure exuded a melancholic aura. Its weathered wood and broken windows seemed to weep with memories of sorrow and loss. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin was a silent witness to tragedies long past, a repository for the restless spirit that had begun to haunt our every step. Inside, the air was thick with the musty scent of decay and neglect. As we split up to explore, I trailed behind Lucas and Olivia, who appeared to know more about the cabin's history. Lucas recounted in a hushed tone the legend of a young child who had once lived in these parts, a child whose life had been cut short under mysterious and tragic circumstances. According to local lore, the spirit of this child had never found rest. It began as a benign presence, a sorrowful echo of lost innocence, but over time, if disturbed or neglected, it could transform into something vengeful and dangerous. His voice cracked on the last word, and I sensed that he was reliving memories that still haunted him. In the dim light that filtered through the shattered roof, I felt as if unseen eyes were watching us. Shadows seemed to twist and contort, taking on shapes that were almost human yet disturbingly inhuman. I noticed small marks on the walls, scrawled symbols that looked like desperate pleas for mercy or warnings to those who might enter. The atmosphere was oppressive, charged with an energy that defied explanation. As we moved deeper into the cabin, the sense of unease intensified until it was impossible to ignore. It wasn't long before we heard it again, that soft, childlike giggle, now accompanied by a series of low, mournful sobs. It was as if the building itself was grieving. Mia, who had followed us into the cabin reluctantly, stopped dead in her tracks. "Do you feel that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "It's like the air is crying." Olivia rolled her eyes, but I saw the tremor in her hands betray her own fear. Derek, ever the skeptic, scoffed at the notion, but I could tell he was unnerved too. Our exploration led us to a small, dust-covered room at the far end of the cabin. In the center, a broken mirror lay shattered across the floor, its fragments reflecting the dim light in a chaotic array of angles. It was there, amid the debris, that I found what I can only describe as an altar. A crude arrangement of old photographs, faded letters, and a small, tattered doll. The doll's eyes were missing, and its face was contorted into an expression of eternal sorrow. I reached out to touch it, and the moment my fingers brushed its worn fabric, I felt an icy shock surge through me, as if the very spirit of the child had reached out for contact. In that moment, everything shifted. The cabin seemed to close in around us, and the air turned frigid. The sorrowful whispers turned to angry murmurs echoing through the broken corridors. I could hear the soft shuffle of feet, and then a low, guttural sound that was neither animal nor human. Suddenly, from the darkest corner of the room, a figure emerged. It was small, shrouded in a tattered, childlike silhouette. But as it drew closer, its features contorted in an expression of pain and malice. The entity's eyes glowed with an unholy light, and I realized with a sinking heart that the legend was not merely a sad ghost story. It was very real. Panic erupted in our group. Derek, who had been boasting about confronting legends head-on, rushed forward without thinking. "Show yourself!" he shouted, his voice echoing in the oppressive darkness. But as he stepped closer, the spectral child's expression shifted abruptly, from sorrow to vengeful fury. In an instant, what had seemed like a tragic apparition transformed into a violent force. With unnatural speed, the entity lunged at Derek, its small hands turning into something claw-like. I could only watch in horror as Derek was struck down, his cries echoing through the dilapidated walls. I lunged forward, grabbing Derek's arm in a desperate attempt to pull him back. But the entity's grip was like ice. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, and I felt as though I were caught in a tide of supernatural wrath. Mia screamed, and Olivia's logical protests were swallowed by the cacophony of terror that had descended upon us. Lucas, his face ashen, muttered something about appeasing the spirit by understanding its tragic past, but his words were lost in the chaos. The confrontation was over in what felt like seconds, but stretched into an eternity in my mind. Derek's body slumped to the floor, lifeless, while the spectral child hovered above him, its eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to sear the very soul of the cabin. The entity's vengeful spirit radiated a cold malice, and I could feel its presence probing our minds as if seeking out our deepest fears and regrets. It wasn't content to simply linger. It wanted retribution for a past injustice, and we had unwittingly become its target. In the aftermath, we scrambled in a frenzied state. Lucas, his hands trembling, urged us to leave the cabin immediately. "We have to get out of here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, laden with the weight of old trauma and the realization that this was no longer just a legend. It was a living nightmare. Mia, tears streaming down her face, clutched at me as we backed toward the exit. Olivia, normally so composed, was visibly shaken, her skepticism having evaporated in the face of undeniable horror. Outside, the torrential rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but the forest was no less menacing. The narrow path back to the RV was slick and treacherous, every step a potential slide into the unknown. Our hearts pounded in our chests as we stumbled through the undergrowth, the oppressive presence of the entity seemingly following us with every rustle of leaves and distant cry of the wind. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those glowing eyes emerging from the shadows. Our escape was a chaotic blur of shouts, stumbling footsteps, and desperate attempts to fix the malfunctioning navigation system on the RV. The equipment, already unreliable, now seemed cursed by the events of the night. Lucas and I worked frantically to reestablish a semblance of order, while Mia and Olivia kept watch, their eyes darting nervously between the dark tree line and the flickering interior of the RV. The loss of Derek weighed heavily on us, a grim reminder that this forest did not take kindly to those who dared disturb its secrets. As we finally managed to start the engine and pull away from the clearing, I felt a numb mixture of relief and sorrow. The road ahead was shrouded in a heavy mist, the once familiar landscape of Turkey Run now a tapestry of haunting silhouettes and memories of what had transpired. The memory of Derek's final moments, the pleading look in his eyes as he confronted the wrath of the vengeful spirit, would forever be seared into my mind. Over the long drive back to civilization, silence settled over our group like a heavy shroud. Mia sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the rain-streaked window as if searching for answers in the blurred outlines of the world outside. Olivia, who had prided herself on her rationality, remained unusually silent, lost in thoughts that I knew were far from comforting. Lucas's face was lined with the pain of old memories, the weight of his past experiences etched deeply into his expression. And me. I was left grappling with guilt and the haunting question of whether we had somehow provoked the malevolent force that had taken our friend. In the days that followed, I found myself unable to shake the memory of that spectral child. At night, when I closed my eyes, I could still hear the echo of her mournful sobs and the chilling, vengeful laughter that had signaled Derek's demise. I tried to rationalize it all, to convince myself that the events at the cabin were a tragic convergence of coincidence and misfortune. But deep down, I knew that something ancient and sorrowful had been awakened in those dark recesses of Turkey Run. I began to research the local legends with a determination born of both dread and a desperate need for understanding. I learned that the story of the lost child was woven into the fabric of local folklore, a tale of neglect and tragedy that had over decades evolved into a cautionary myth among the residents of Indiana. The spirit was said to have once been an innocent soul, a victim of circumstances far beyond her control, whose cries for help had been ignored. Over time, her sorrow turned to anger, and her presence became a warning to those who ventured too close to the edge of the supernatural. For weeks, I struggled to reconcile the rational part of my mind with the overwhelming evidence of that night. I revisited Turkey Run State Park on my own, determined to confront my fears and perhaps find a semblance of closure. As I stood at the edge of a clearing near the very spot where our group had fled, I could almost feel the lingering presence of the entity, a cold, unyielding force that whispered of unfinished business and eternal sorrow. I left a small token near a weathered stone, a silent apology to the restless spirit, hoping that acknowledging her pain might grant her the peace she had long been denied. Yet even as I made that small gesture, I knew that the scars of that night would never fully heal. The forest, with its gnarled trees and hidden shadows, had revealed a truth I could no longer ignore. Some legends are born of real, unhealed wounds, and the line between myth and reality is perilously thin. The loss of Derek, the overwhelming terror and the inescapable feeling of being hunted by forces beyond our control left an indelible mark on all of us. I eventually returned to my life in the city, but the memories of that fateful weekend continued to haunt me. The once comforting embrace of rationality had been shattered, replaced by a lingering awareness of the supernatural forces that might be lurking just beyond the veil of our understanding. In quiet moments, I found myself glancing at the old photographs we had taken that day, images that now seemed to capture not only our smiles, but also the shadows of the past that would forever follow us. Every so often, I receive calls from Mia, who has since become more attuned to the subtle signals of the world around her. She insists on sharing her latest experiences, recounting how she sometimes hears soft laughter in empty corridors or feels a cold presence at her side in moments of solitude. Olivia, whose skepticism was irrevocably shaken, now speaks in hushed tones about the possibility that there are realms of existence beyond our comprehension. Lucas remains the most reticent of us all, often lost in silent reflection, his eyes haunted by memories that we dare not speak of. And as for me, I carry the weight of that night with every step I take, a constant reminder that even in our modern rational world, there are forces that defy explanation. In the quiet hours of the night when the city lights fade and the darkness envelops me, I still hear the echo of that spectral child's cry, a chilling refrain that lingers like a curse. I know that I will never fully escape the memory of Turkey Run, for it has become a part of me, a testament to the fragile boundary between the known and the unknowable, between life and the restless spirit that continues to wander in search of justice, or perhaps, redemption. This experience has taught me that the wilderness is not merely a collection of trees and trails, but a living tapestry of stories, some of which are woven from sorrow, anger, and the relentless hunger for recognition. I learned that the rational mind can only take you so far, and that sometimes the truth lies in the spaces between what we can explain and what we can only feel. As I sit here now writing these words, I am filled with a deep-seated resolve to never again ignore the subtle signs of the supernatural. The forest had spoken in a language of despair and fury, and I, for one, cannot turn a deaf ear to its mournful call. The memory of Derek's untimely death remains a stark reminder of the price we paid for our hubris. In our quest to seek out the unknown, we underestimated the power of legends and the real, palpable force that they can embody. The vengeful spirit of that lost child was not merely a passive observer of our trespasses. It was a guardian of secrets and a harbinger of retribution for those who dared to disturb its long-held grief. And while we managed to escape with our lives, the haunting presence of that sorrowful entity lingers still, a spectral echo in the quiet corners of my mind. In the end, I have come to understand that some mysteries are best left untouched, that the line between curiosity and peril is razor thin. My story is not one of triumph over darkness, but rather a cautionary tale, a reminder that beneath the veneer of our everyday world lies a realm of secrets and lost souls, forever waiting in the shadows to remind us of the cost of our recklessness. As I move forward, I carry with me the lessons learned in the depths of Turkey Run, and I honor the memory of those who fell victim to forces beyond our control. I now live with a cautious respect for the unknown, an awareness that every step into the wilderness carries the risk of awakening something that should remain undisturbed. And while I continue to seek solace in the beauty of nature, I do so with a wary eye, knowing that beneath the serene landscapes may lie a history of sorrow and a promise of vengeance, a promise that some spirits once disturbed will never be at rest. So if you ever find yourself drawn to the quiet majesty of a state park, remember my story. Let it serve as a reminder that nature is not merely a backdrop for our lives, but a realm filled with memories, legends, and forces that are as old as time. And if you hear laughter in the dead of night or find inexplicable footprints at your window, heed those signs, for they may be the whispers of a world that is far more real and far more dangerous than you ever imagined. I am Ethan Porter, forever changed by the shadows of Turkey Run, and I live each day with the knowledge that the line between the seen and unseen is not as solid as we once believed. The wilderness, with its ancient trees and hidden paths, holds secrets that can consume the unwary, and I, having witnessed its dark heart, know that some legends are best remembered as warnings rather than tales of adventure. My name is Samantha Gray, and I'm 38 years old. This happened in late October, when the chill in the air felt like an invitation to escape the relentless reminders of my recent loss. After my husband's sudden passing, I found myself suffocating in the concrete confines of the city, a place filled with memories I could neither erase nor embrace. So, with nothing left but a collection of his photographs, a few cherished mementos in my sketchbooks, I packed my well-worn RV and set out on a journey across Indiana, hoping to rediscover a part of myself that had been buried under grief. I had chosen Brown County State Park for its famed autumn colors and its reputation as a haven for introspection. The park, with its rustic charm and artistic legacy, seemed like the perfect sanctuary for a broken heart seeking renewal. My RV, a small but sturdy vehicle that had seen me through many solitary trips, was loaded with everything I needed: painting supplies, journals filled with unfinished thoughts, and a box of mementos that carried the echoes of happier days. The drive out of the city was a bittersweet blur. I spent hours watching the skyline recede behind me as the open road unfurled like a promise of new beginnings. Yet, as the miles accumulated, So did the memories of him, each familiar landmark and fleeting sign stirring a blend of comfort and heartache. I was determined to find solace in nature's quiet wisdom, even if the path was lined with unexpected obstacles. Not long after leaving the urban sprawl, my journey took an unforeseen detour. While navigating a lonely stretch of highway, the RV's engine began to cough and sputter, eventually coming to a halt in the middle of nowhere. The silence of the countryside was suddenly shattered by the mechanical groans of my stranded vehicle. I pulled over, heart pounding with a mix of frustration and apprehension, and tried to diagnose the problem myself. Despite my basic mechanical skills, it quickly became apparent that I was in over my head. After what felt like an eternity of phone calls and roadside research, a local mechanic arrived, a gruff, middle-aged man with calloused hands and a surprisingly gentle demeanor. He introduced himself as Hank, and although his words were sparse, his eyes held a kindness that cut through the bitterness of my situation. "Sometimes these old machines need a bit of care," he said in a gravelly voice as he set to work under the hood. His quiet reassurances did little to dispel my growing sense of isolation, but they did offer a brief respite from my swirling thoughts. As Hank worked, he shared a few cryptic words of encouragement, hinting that sometimes life's breakdowns were nature's way of urging us to slow down and heal. With the RV finally humming once more, albeit with a lingering clank that reminded me of its fragility, I resumed my journey toward Brown County. The delay had stretched my timeline and deepened the loneliness that clung to me like a second skin. As I pulled into a small, weathered rest stop to stretch my legs and gather my thoughts, an unexpected sound broke the silence. A soft melody drifting from an old battery-powered radio mounted on a rusted post. The tune was one I hadn't heard in years, yet it stirred memories of evenings spent with my husband, laughing over shared secrets as that very song played in the background. I stood there, transfixed, feeling as if the universe had arranged this moment just for me. A tender reminder that I was not entirely alone in my grief. Shaken by the uncanny occurrence, I made my way back to the RV only to discover another peculiar sign. Draped over the edge of the windshield was an old scarf, the fabric unmistakably similar to one my husband used to wear on our first trip together. I ran my fingers over its soft, worn texture, and for a brief moment, the sorrow was intermingled with a warmth that I had thought was lost forever. I couldn't decide if these were mere coincidences or something more. A gentle nudge from the past urging me to confront the love I still carried in my heart. After a day of reflective driving, I reached a small town on the outskirts of Brown County. The town, with its faded storefronts and quiet streets, had an air of timelessness. I decided to stop at a quaint vintage bookshop nestled on a corner, its windows filled with well-loved novels and relics of bygone eras. The shop was run by an older woman named Margaret, whose silver hair and knowing smile suggested a lifetime of witnessing life's ebbs and flows. As we chatted over a pot of herbal tea, Margaret spoke softly about the ways in which nature often communicates with us in subtle, inexplicable ways. How a stray melody, a forgotten trinket, or a whispered wind could carry messages of comfort and renewal. Her words, gentle and reassuring, felt like a balm to my wounded soul. She told me stories of local lore, of how the land itself seemed to conspire to heal those who were brave enough to listen. Encouraged by my conversation with Margaret, I ventured next to a small diner recommended by a passing local. The diner was a cozy establishment with worn leather booths and a counter that gleamed with the memories of countless conversations. There, I met a soft-spoken artist named Claire, who was known around town for her evocative paintings of the landscape. Over a cup of strong coffee and a slice of pie, Claire recounted her own journey of healing after a personal loss. She described the transformative power of art and nature, how the two had intertwined to mend her shattered heart. Her story resonated deeply with me, affirming that the path to renewal, though fraught with pain, could lead to a future where sorrow was transmuted into beauty. With my heart a little lighter from these encounters, I pressed onward toward Brown County State Park. However, the weather soon conspired against me. As I entered the park, dark clouds gathered with alarming speed, and a sudden downpour transformed the once inviting landscape into a chaotic tableau of driving rain and howling winds. I found a secluded campsite deep within the park, a lonely clearing bordered by towering trees and a narrow, muddy road. The RV parked on a small rise felt both a refuge and a trap as the storm's fury intensified. Inside the RV, the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof merged with the turbulent beating of my heart. The isolation of that remote spot, with no nearby neighbors or the comforting hum of civilization, amplified every memory, every regret. I sat by the small battery lamp, its dim light flickering against the damp walls, and pulled out my journal. With trembling hands, I began to write, the words flowing out as if they had been waiting for this very storm to be released. I wrote about the breakdown on the highway, about Hank's kind words, about the eerie coincidences that had filled my journey with both wonder and melancholy. I painted vivid images with my words, of my husband's laughter, of the soft glow of sunset on his face, and of the unspoken promises we had made to each other. The storm outside was relentless, its roar a constant reminder of the chaos that had upended my life. Yet as I wrote, I felt a stirring deep within, a fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to mend the broken pieces of my heart. As the night wore on, the storm's intensity reached its zenith. Thunder rumbled in the distance and lightning split the sky into jagged shards of light. In the solitude of that stormy night, memories surged forth with overwhelming force. I saw flashes of our happier times, lazy Sunday mornings in the sunlit kitchen, long walks hand in hand along the river, quiet evenings spent sharing dreams under starlit skies. Each memory was both a comfort and a sting, a reminder of what I had lost and of the love that still lingered like a ghost in the corridors of my mind. In the midst of this internal tempest, I turned to my painting supplies. With each brushstroke, on a canvas propped up against the RV's battered wall, I attempted to capture the raw emotion of the moment. The colors were wild and unrestrained, a chaotic blend of blues, grays, and hints of gold that somehow mirrored the storm outside. And the tumult within, I lost track of time, immersed in the catharsis of creation. The act of painting became a silent conversation with my husband, an acknowledgement that while he was gone, the love we shared was too profound to be erased. Hours passed, and gradually the furious howl of the storm began to recede. The wind softened, and the rain tapered off to a gentle patter against the metal roof of the RV. In the fragile light of pre-dawn, I set aside my brush and stepped outside. The world was transformed. The dark, tempestuous sky had given way to a subtle pastel glow that hinted at a new beginning. Dew blanketed the ground, and the air, fresh and cool, carried the quiet symphony of birds beginning their morning songs. Standing there in that serene, post-storm silence, I felt a profound shift within me. The chaos of the night, both external and internal, had subsided, leaving behind a tender sense of possibility. The forest, bathed in the soft hues of dawn, seemed to whisper that renewal was not only possible but inevitable. I looked at my RV, AI, symbol of my journey, with all its mechanical quirks and hidden scars, and felt a surge of determination. I would repair it, continue my journey, and, most importantly, carry the lessons of this night with me. Over the following days, as I slowly navigated the restored trails of Brown County, I began to see the subtle magic of the place in every detail. The once ominous remnants of the storm were now signs of rebirth, leaves glistening with moisture, the gentle murmur of a brook returning to life, and the quiet rustle of the trees as if in conversation with the wind. Each step forward was an act of courage, a choice to honor the past while embracing the future. In the quiet afternoons, I found solace at a small overlook that provided a panoramic view of the rolling hills and dense forests of Brown County. Here, I often set up my easel and painted the landscapes before me. With every stroke, I let go of a little more sorrow, transforming the raw pain of loss into a vibrant tapestry of hope and resilience. I recalled the kind words of Margaret from the vintage bookshop and the inspiring story of Claire at the diner. Their simple acts of kindness had reaffirmed my belief that the world still held beauty and meaning, even in the midst of grief. There were moments, too, when the loneliness crept back in, quiet, unbidden reminders that I was alone in my journey. In those times, I would find comfort in the small wonders around me, the delicate pattern of frost on a window, the distant call of an owl at dusk, or the way the morning mist enveloped the landscape in a soft embrace. Each of these moments felt like a gentle nod from the universe, affirming that healing was a process, a journey of small steps, rather than one giant leap. One afternoon, as I was driving along a winding road that cut through a dense copse of trees, I noticed something that made me slow to a stop. Hanging from a branch near the roadside was a small, weathered sign bearing the name of a trail that I had once walked with my husband. The sign, nearly obscured by ivy and time, was a poignant reminder of a chapter of my life that I had long tried to leave behind. I parked the RV and stepped out, the autumn air cool against my skin. For a long moment I simply stood there, absorbing the weight of that memory. It was as if the past and present had merged into a single tangible entity, a silent call to honor the love that had shaped me. That night, as I sat in the quiet comfort of my RV once more, I reflected on the journey I had undertaken. The mechanical breakdown, the unexpected signs, the kind strangers, and the fierce storm had all converged to force me into a confrontation with my deepest fears and regrets. I realized that my grief, though raw and painful, was also a testament to the depth of my love. It was a part of me, a story written in every tear, every brushstroke, and every heartbeat. And as I prepared to continue my journey, I made a promise to myself that I would carry this love forward, using it to fuel my art, to guide my steps, and to remind me that even in the darkest moments, there is a path to renewal. Driving away from Brown County, I felt a subtle transformation within. The road stretched out before me like an unwritten chapter, its twists and turns a reminder that life is full of unexpected detours. Yet now I approached each bend with a quiet confidence, a belief that every challenge was an opportunity to grow, to heal, and to honor the memory of what once was. I kept the old scarf on a little shelf in the RV, a cherished relic that now symbolized both loss and the promise of new beginnings. As the miles passed beneath the wheels of my RV, and the landscape shifted from the deep greens of the forest to the open horizons of rural Indiana, I felt a steady resurgence of hope. The world, with all its scars and splendor, was a canvas waiting to be painted upon. Just as my life was a work in progress, each moment a brushstroke contributing to a larger, ever-evolving masterpiece. I knew that the journey ahead would not be free of pain or unexpected detours, but I was ready to embrace it all with an open heart and a resolute spirit. Now, as I write these words with the soft hum of the engine in the background and the steady rhythm of the road beneath me, I feel a deep sense of gratitude for the storm that once trapped me in a dark, isolated campground. That tempest, both literal and metaphorical, had forced me to confront the depths of my sorrow and ultimately led me to a place of quiet renewal. I have learned that healing is not about forgetting, but about finding a way to live fully with the memories that shape us. My journey through Brown County, with its unexpected messages and tender reminders, has become a part of my story, a story that I now share with anyone willing to listen. For in the silence of nature, amid the echoes of old songs and familiar trinkets, I discovered that the heart has an infinite capacity to mend, to forgive, and to bloom again, even after the harshest of winters. I continue to travel the roads of Indiana, my RV, a loyal companion on this ever-unfolding journey of self-discovery. Each day brings new encounters, small wonders, and moments of unexpected beauty that remind me that life, with all its pain and joy, is a delicate dance between holding on and letting go. And as I move forward, I carry the love of my lost partner. In every stroke of my brush, every word I write, and every mile I traverse, ever grateful for the reminder that even in the midst of sorrow, there lies the promise of renewal. So, if you ever find yourself lost, overwhelmed by the weight of your own memories, I invite you to take a step into nature, listen for the familiar songs in the wind, Watch for the signs that seem too precise to be mere coincidence, and allow yourself to be touched by the gentle magic of the world. For it is in those quiet moments, when the heart is open and the soul is raw, that we find the courage to begin again. My name is Samantha Gray, and I am still on that journey. A journey of grief, of healing, and of discovering that every ending carries within it the seed of a new beginning. Each mile, each storm, each unexpected encounter has led me a little closer to understanding that renewal is not a destination, but a continuous process, a delicate unfolding of the heart, one gentle moment at a time. My name is Travis Monroe, and I'm 40 years old. This happened one humid summer when the weight of unsolved mysteries and past failures drove me out onto the quiet, winding roads of Indiana. After years on the police force and an investigation that still haunts me, I left the department to become a freelance investigative journalist. I hoped that by chasing cold cases and forgotten secrets, I might finally redeem myself and ease the burden of regret that had clung to me like a second skin. My latest assignment led me to the banks of the Tippecanoe River, a placid waterway, with a reputation for hiding dark secrets in the shadows of its small, weathered towns. I loaded my aging RV with everything I might need: a well-worn camera, a digital recorder, stacks of old case files, and a notebook that had seen too many nights of restless scribbling. The RV, more a reliable companion than a luxury vehicle, had been my mobile office and refuge for years. Its engine was temperamental at best, a fact that made me both anxious and oddly comforted. The machine's unreliability echoed my own haunted past. I set off at dawn, the early light glinting off the dew-soaked highways, and drove deeper into the rural heartland of Indiana, determined to uncover the truth behind a series of mysterious disappearances that had plagued a small riverside town for decades. The journey was uneventful at first, a monotonous hum of tires on pavement, punctuated by the occasional rustle of wind in the trees. But as I neared the outskirts of the town, trouble began to rear its head. About 2 hours into my trip, while traversing a narrow, winding back road along the river, the RV began to cough and sputter. I pulled over on a deserted stretch of pavement, the heat of the day beating down relentlessly. I popped the hood and fiddled with the engine, but it wasn't long before I realized that my mechanical skills were inadequate for this particular crisis. After a few frustrated minutes and a few choice words muttered under my breath, I decided to call for help. It wasn't long before a battered pickup truck pulled up alongside my RV. Out stepped a man with calloused hands and a face weathered by years of hard work, a local mechanic named Hank. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "This old girl's been through a lot," he said in a gravelly tone as he knelt beside the engine. There was a kindness in his eyes as he worked, though his words were few. "Sometimes the best machines are the ones that remind you to slow down," he remarked cryptically while tightening a bolt. His reassurance was simple, but it allowed me a moment to collect my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that the breakdown was more than just bad luck. It felt like an omen. With Hank's help, the RV grudgingly roared back to life, albeit with an occasional clank that served as a constant reminder of its age and frailty. I thanked him and resumed my journey, my nerves already on edge. As I approached a secluded campsite near a bend in the Tippecanoe River, I slowed to a stop and took a moment to observe my surroundings. The landscape was deceptively serene, a wide river curving lazily past dense clusters of trees, the distant hum of cicadas filling the air. Yet something about the scene felt off, a subtle tension that lay just beneath the surface. I parked the RV a short distance from the riverbank, leaving a narrow strip of gravel under the tires, and stepped out into the heavy afternoon air. I began my investigation with a walk along the river's edge, camera and notepad in hand. That's when I first saw it. Cryptic graffiti etched into a large, flat rock. The words, almost illegible in the fading light, mentioned "those who vanish" and "the river's secret," scrawled in what appeared to be hurried strokes. The message sent a shiver down my spine, and I snapped several pictures, determined to capture every detail. It was the first tangible clue that the disappearances were not random tragedies, but part of a dark tapestry woven into the history of this place. Later, I drove into town seeking answers in the most unassuming of places, a local diner that had the worn charm of a bygone era. The diner was a modest establishment, its interior decorated with faded photographs and a perpetual hum of quiet conversation. I slid into a booth near the counter and ordered a cup of coffee, my mind still racing with the implications of the graffiti. As I sipped my coffee, I listened to the murmurs around me. The owner, an elderly man who'd once been a schoolteacher, leaned in close and with a wary glance around whispered about the river's secret. His eyes darted nervously as he mentioned that talk of the disappearances was forbidden, a silence enforced by forces in town that didn't want the truth known. I pressed him gently for details, but he only shrugged, his face etched with the burden of unspoken truths. Back at the RV later that afternoon, I reviewed the photographs I'd taken and listened to the faint recording of my own voice as I described the scene. There was an odd juxtaposition between the beauty of the river and the sinister undercurrent of its history. With the day waning, I decided to further explore the area by heading toward an abandoned boathouse I'd heard whispered about in local lore. According to fragments of conversation I'd picked up, the boathouse was a relic from an era when smugglers and secretive meetings were common along the river. I drove a short distance off the main road, following a gravel path that twisted through overgrown brush until I reached a clearing where the boathouse stood, half swallowed by nature. The structure was dilapidated, a once proud building now in decay. Its wooden planks were weathered and the windows were broken, letting in drafts of cold, damp air. I stepped inside, careful not to disturb the dust that had settled over years of abandonment. In one corner of the building, partially hidden by a tattered tarp, I found evidence that made my heart quicken. Lying on a rotted table was a faded ledger, its pages brittle with age. The entries were written in hurried, almost illegible scrawl, detailing clandestine meetings and exchanges that hinted at a long-forgotten smuggling ring. Next to the ledger were personal belongings, a wallet, a set of keys, and a faded photograph of a smiling young woman whose eyes now stared blankly from the sepia-toned image. I could almost feel her presence, as if her fate was entwined with the secrets of this place. As I leafed through the ledger, memories of a case from my police days began to stir. I'd once been involved in an investigation that, despite my best efforts, had gone cold, its unsolved details gnawing at me. The similarities between that old case and the clues before me were too striking to ignore. Guilt, regret, and a determination to finally bring closure surged within me. I carefully documented everything, photographing each piece of evidence and noting down every detail in my battered notebook. Over the next few days, I based myself near the river, my RV serving as both office and sanctuary as I pieced together the puzzle. Yet, as I delved deeper into the investigation, an unsettling sense of being watched began to gnaw at my instincts. At first, it was subtle, a glimpse of a shadow flitting between the trees when I stepped out at dusk, a distant figure that vanished when I turned to look directly. Then came the anonymous phone calls. Late one night, as I sat reviewing my notes by the dim light of a desk lamp, the phone rang. I hesitated before answering, the silence on the other end stretching out like a dark chasm. Finally, in a voice that was barely a whisper, someone said, "Stop digging or you'll become one of them." The line went dead, leaving me with an icy dread that clutched at my heart. Matters worsened when I returned to the RV one afternoon to find it vandalized. The door had been forced open, and the interior bore the marks of deliberate destruction. Paper scattered, equipment damaged, and an ominous message hastily scrawled on the wall. Some secrets are best left buried. My pulse pounded as I surveyed the damage. It was clear that someone didn't want me uncovering what lay beneath the surface of this quiet town. I felt exposed and vulnerable, yet a stubborn part of me refused to back down. I contacted a local informant, a park ranger known for his reticence but also for his knowledge of the area. He met me on the outskirts of town, his eyes cautious as he urged me to be careful. "There are forces here that you can't understand," he warned. Follow the clues, but know that every step you take might lead you closer to danger. His words, though cryptic, steeled my resolve. The tension escalated one stormy night. I had taken shelter at an abandoned factory on the river's edge, a relic of the past when the smuggling ring was at its peak. The rain hammered down in sheets, turning the surrounding landscape into a chaotic blur of water and wind. I had come here following a lead that suggested this factory was once the meeting point for those involved in the clandestine operations. As I crept through the factory's broken corridors, my senses on high alert, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing in the darkness. My heart pounded as I edged forward, every instinct screaming that I was not alone. Before I could react, a group of masked figures emerged from the shadows. They moved with a coordinated precision that hinted at military-like training, and their eyes, if they could be called that behind their masks, burned with a cold determination. I felt a surge of adrenaline as my training kicked in. I darted behind rusted machinery and crates, my breath shallow and rapid as I fumbled for my recorder and camera. The figures split up, their voices low and urgent as they barked orders to each other. I could barely make out snippets. Don't let him get away, and secure the evidence. Panic and resolve warred within me. I knew that if they found me, it wouldn't just be an attack. It would be the end of my investigation and possibly my life. My mind raced as I considered my options. There was a narrow passage leading deeper into the factory, and I chose to risk it. With every step, the sound of pursuit grew louder, and I could feel the presence of those shadowy figures closing in. The darkness became a cloak that both concealed and threatened me. I rounded a corner and stumbled into a large open space. A former warehouse area filled with rusted equipment and broken glass. The storm outside provided a constant backdrop of howling wind and clattering rain, but inside the tension was nearly suffocating. In the chaos, I managed to secure a small evidence box that contained copies of the ledger pages, a few photographs, and even a mysterious key that looked like it might unlock further secrets. I tucked the evidence under my jacket and pressed myself against the cold, damp wall. My breath came in ragged gasps as I listened to the muffled voices of my pursuers. For what felt like an eternity, I remained perfectly still, each second stretching into a lifetime. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sounds faded into silence. Whether they had retreated or moved on, I couldn't be sure. I seized the moment to slip out through a broken door, sprinting into the torrential rain, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop running until I reached the relative safety of my RV. My hands trembled as I locked the door, my mind still reeling from the close encounter. I knew then that I had pushed the investigation into dangerous territory, a territory where the past was guarded by those willing to do anything to keep its secrets hidden. Once inside, I immediately called a trusted former colleague from my police days, Detective Ramirez. His voice, roughened by years of fieldwork, was a lifeline. I explained everything: the evidence, the cryptic messages, the anonymous threats, and the ambush at the factory. He listened intently, his tone somber, as he promised to forward the evidence to the proper authorities and help reopen the cold case. His reassurance was a small comfort, but I knew that the real battle had only just begun. Over the next several days, I remained in a constant state of heightened alert. Every creak of the RV, every rustle of wind outside, set my nerves on edge. I reviewed the evidence repeatedly, trying to piece together the puzzle that was more labyrinthine than I had ever imagined. The ledger, the photograph of the missing woman, the mysterious key, they all pointed to a well-organized network of criminal activity that had seeped into the very fabric of this small town. Yet the deeper I dug, the more I realized that the truth was murky, smeared with layers of corruption and long-held secrets. In quiet moments, I found myself reflecting on the choices that had brought me here. I remembered my days on the force, the cases that had slipped through the cracks, and the guilt that had followed me since. This investigation was more than a professional pursuit. It was a personal reckoning. Every piece of evidence was a reminder of the lives lost and the justice that had been denied. The stakes were high, and I knew that by unearthing these secrets, I risked reopening wounds I had tried so desperately to heal. Despite the danger, I pressed on. I met with the park ranger again, this time in a secluded clearing along the river where the dense trees provided a natural shield from prying eyes. He revealed fragments of information that only deepened the mystery. He spoke of meetings held under the cover of darkness, of coded messages passed among the locals, and of a powerful group determined to keep the past buried. His eyes, shadowed by the weight of his own secrets, told me that he too was caught in the snare of this long-forgotten conspiracy. One crisp morning, as the mist lifted off the river and the first hints of autumn touched the landscape, I sat in my RV reviewing all I had gathered. The evidence was damning, and with Detective Ramirez now involved, there was a real chance that justice could finally be served for the victims of these disappearances. Yet an unsettling question lingered in my mind. If the conspirators were so desperate to silence me, how far would they go? And would I, in my quest for truth, ultimately become a casualty of their ruthless determination? That question haunted me as I drove slowly along the river bend, the winding road disappearing into a thick bank of fog. Every twist and turn seemed to harbor hidden dangers, every rustling leaf a potential threat. The RV's engine rumbled steadily, a constant reminder of both its own frailty and the fragility of the life I was leading on the edge of danger. I arrived at a small motel in a town that lay on the fringes of the Tippecanoe River community. The air was thick with the scent of rain and decaying leaves, and the locals moved with a cautious demeanor, as if the very ground they walked on was stained with secrets. In the lobby, I struck up a conversation with an elderly man who worked behind the counter. Over a cup of lukewarm coffee, he shared with me whispered stories of the past, the unsolved disappearances, the mysterious figures seen at night, and the quiet terror that had gripped the town for years. His eyes were filled with sorrow and resignation, and though he spoke in hushed tones, every word resonated with a deep, unspoken fear. That night, as I lay in a creaky motel room, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, replaying the day's events in my mind. The ambush at the factory, the cryptic graffiti, the anonymous phone call, they all merged into a single disquieting narrative that seemed to point toward a powerful, hidden enemy. I clutched the mysterious key I had found, wondering what door it might unlock and what further secrets lay in wait. Sleep eluded me as I stared into the darkness, haunted by the possibility that every shadow concealed a threat. When morning finally broke, I returned to my RV with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that I had to keep moving, to document every piece of evidence and to expose the dark network that had terrorized this community for so long. With Detective Ramirez on the case and my own determination fueling me, I began to methodically piece together the timeline of events. The ledger's entries, the faded photographs, and the personal effects all pointed to a clandestine operation that had once thrived along the river. There were whispers of a smuggling ring that had operated under the radar, using the river as a natural conduit for illicit activities. Over time, as law enforcement cracked down on overt criminality, the network had gone underground, evolving into a shadowy syndicate that silenced anyone who dared to question its authority. In the ensuing days, I ventured back to the abandoned boathouse, this time with a small portable scanner and recording equipment. I was determined to capture any additional evidence that might corroborate the theory of a long-standing criminal enterprise. The building, already steeped in decay, seemed to hold its breath as I moved through its dark corridors. In a hidden compartment behind a loose panel in the wall, I discovered a bundle of letters, correspondence between known criminals and local officials that suggested a collusion so deep it chilled me to the core. I spent hours transcribing and photographing the documents, each word a testament to the corruption that had festered in silence for decades. Yet even as I documented these damning revelations, I remained acutely aware that every step I took was being watched. I noticed a black sedan idling near the RV site on more than one occasion, and I caught fleeting glimpses of a figure in a dark coat trailing me at a distance. The tension was palpable, and every noise, every shift in the wind, sent my pulse racing. I installed a small motion-sensitive camera outside the RV, hoping to catch proof of the surveillance. The images that later appeared on the screen confirmed my worst fears. a pair of dark, featureless eyes, and a vague silhouette that seemed to follow me relentlessly. One particularly stormy evening, as the wind whipped the trees into a frenzy and rain pounded the roof of the RV, I received another ominous phone call. This time, the message was clear. Stop now, or you'll be next. The voice was distorted, cold, and devoid of any emotion. I sat in the dim light of my RV, the sound of the storm outside merging with the racing of my heart, and wondered if I had already crossed a line from which there was no return. The culmination of these events came on a night when the sky itself seemed to be at war with the earth. I had received a tip, one that I couldn't ignore, about a secret meeting scheduled to take place near an abandoned factory on the edge of the river. The factory, once a bustling hub during the heyday of the smuggling ring, now stood as a decaying monument to a time when the river ran with more than just water. The tip promised that crucial evidence would be exchanged there, evidence that could finally expose the network responsible for the decades-long disappearances. With the evidence box and my recorder in hand, I set out into the storm. The road to the factory was treacherous. Rain transformed the asphalt into a slick reflective mirror, and fog clung to the landscape like a shroud. My RV's headlights pierced the gloom as I drove slowly, every turn of the wheel a cautious negotiation with fate. When I finally arrived, the factory loomed before me, a hulking, derelict structure that seemed to breathe a silent menace. I parked the RV at a safe distance and made my way on foot, clutching the evidence box tightly. The building's broken windows and rusted doors were a stark reminder of what had once been, and as I stepped inside, the smell of damp decay and old oil filled my nostrils. I moved cautiously through the vast empty space, every step echoing in the cavernous darkness. Then, out of the silence, came the sound of approaching footsteps, a deliberate, measured cadence that set my nerves on high alert. Before I could react, a group of masked individuals emerged from the shadows. They moved with coordinated precision, their faces hidden behind dark balaclavas that obscured any hint of humanity. One of them stepped forward, a cold glint in his eyes as he barked an order. "Stop right there," he commanded, his voice muffled by the mask yet brimming with authority. Instinct took over. I dove behind a collapsed metal beam, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would betray my position. For what felt like an eternity, I crouched in the darkness, every muscle tense with fear and adrenaline. I could hear them splitting up, their footsteps methodical as they searched the area. My mind raced. Should I try to run, or should I stand my ground and hope to escape unnoticed? The thought of leaving behind all the evidence I'd painstakingly gathered was unbearable. Yet the prospect of confrontation was equally terrifying. I decided then that survival was paramount. Slowly, I inched my way toward a narrow exit, my breath held in silent prayer. The storm outside provided both cover and a constant barrage of noise. Lightning flashed, momentarily illuminating the desolation of the factory, and thunder drowned out the shouts of my pursuers. I finally reached a side door and slipped through it, not daring to look back until I was safely outside. When I emerged into the driving rain, my clothes were soaked and my limbs trembled, but I clutched the evidence box as if it were my lifeline. I didn't stop running until I reached the relative safety of my RV, my every sense alert to any sign of pursuit. Inside the RV, I locked every door and double-checked the perimeter through the small, motion-sensitive camera I had installed. The images that flickered on the screen showed nothing but empty darkness, yet the sense of being hunted remained. I dialed Detective Ramirez once more, my voice trembling as I recounted the ambush and the evidence I had managed to secure. He promised to expedite the forwarding of my findings to the proper authorities, and assured me that an investigation would be reopened. His words offered a glimmer of hope, though the scars of that night were already etched into my memory. In the aftermath of that harrowing encounter, I spent several sleepless nights in the RV, rereading old case files and comparing them with the evidence I had uncovered. Each piece of information was like a shard of broken glass, painful to touch yet necessary to piece together the full picture. The ledger entries, the faded photographs, the personal effects, and the mysterious key all converged to reveal a network of corruption and fear that had been allowed to fester for decades. The town along the Tippecanoe River was complicit, its silence a pact with the shadows that guarded its secrets. Even as I grappled with the physical danger, an internal battle raged on. Memories of my time as a detective, cases left unsolved, victims whose voices had been silenced, haunted me relentlessly. I questioned whether I was chasing ghosts, or if these long-buried truths were finally ready to see the light. The weight of my own failures pressed down on me, yet with every new discovery, a sense of redemption began to stir. Perhaps by uncovering this dark conspiracy, I could finally make amends for the mistakes of my past. The investigation, however, was far from over. With the evidence securely in hand and the authorities now alerted, I prepared to leave the area. My RV, though battered and unreliable at times, had served its purpose as both a sanctuary and a mobile archive of the secrets I'd unearthed. As I drove away from the river and the town that had harbored so much darkness, a heavy mist rolled in, blurring the outlines of the landscape and echoing the uncertainty of the future. I knew that the case would continue long after I left, that the powerful network I'd exposed would not simply vanish because I had turned in the evidence. But I also understood that every journey into darkness carried with it the possibility of redemption. The reopening of the case promised justice for those who had been silenced, and a chance for the truth to finally emerge from the shadows. Detective Ramirez's assurances and the renewed interest of the authorities lent me a measure of comfort, even as the scars of my encounter remained. In the quiet moments that followed my departure from the Tippecanoe River region, I allowed myself a rare moment of introspection. I remembered Hank's gentle words during the RV breakdown, the wary caution of the diner owner, the resigned sorrow in the eyes of the motel clerk, and the cryptic warnings of the park ranger. Each of these encounters was a piece of the larger puzzle, a mosaic of human experiences that revealed a community gripped by fear and secrecy. And through it all, I realized that my own journey was as much about confronting my past as it was about exposing a criminal network. I had chased shadows for years, but now I was determined to bring them into the light. As the miles rolled beneath my tires and the early morning light began to break through the mist, I felt a cautious optimism that had been absent for far too long. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential dangers and lingering questions. Yet I also knew that the pursuit of truth, no matter how perilous, was a path I could not abandon. My investigation had already cost me dearly, a brush with violence that left its mark both physically and emotionally, but it had also rekindled a spark of purpose that I had thought long extinguished. Now, as I continue my journey, I carry with me the weight of what I've learned and the hope that someday justice will prevail. The evidence I collected, the anonymous threats, the ambush in that abandoned factory, all of it will serve as a testament to the dark underbelly of a community that had long been silenced. And while I may never fully escape the memories of that night or the guilt of past failures, I am determined to forge ahead, driven by the belief that every truth uncovered is a step toward redemption. The Tippecanoe River, with its deceptive serenity and hidden depths, has changed me forever. It has shown me that beneath even the most placid surfaces lie currents of darkness and secrets that can unravel the fabric of a community. And in confronting these forces, I have come to understand that my own demons, the mistakes and regrets of my past, are not chains meant to bind me, but challenges to be overcome. With each new lead and every piece of evidence, I feel the weight of my past lighten, replaced by a resolve to make things right, however late it may be. I drive on, the road stretching out before me like an unwritten chapter, each mile a reminder that the pursuit of truth is a journey without end. My RV rumbles steadily along the highway, its engine a constant companion in a world that is as unpredictable as it is unforgiving. I glance in the rearview mirror at the darkened outline of the town fading into the distance, a town that, for all its secrets and sorrow, has taught me that even in the deepest shadows, there is always a flicker of light waiting to be discovered. And so, I continue my journey not just as an investigator or a former detective haunted by old cases, but as a man determined to reclaim his own sense of purpose. With every turn of the wheel and every lead followed, I carry the hope that the darkness I've encountered will eventually give way to a brighter, more honest future. Even as the memory of that stormy night and the terror of the ambush linger, I press forward, fueled by the conviction that truth, however hidden, will always find a way to surface. My name is Travis Monroe, and I am still on this long, uncertain road, one that winds through the heart of Indiana and into the depths of human nature. Every mile I travel, every secret I expose is a step toward healing, toward redemption, and toward the belief that justice, no matter how elusive, is worth fighting for. And as the early morning light grows brighter and the mist begins to lift, I know that my journey is far from over. The road ahead is shrouded in mystery, but I drive on with a cautious determination, ready to confront whatever darkness may lie in wait on the next bend. In the quiet solitude of the open road, with only the hum of my RV and the distant echo of my past as company, I embrace the uncertainty of tomorrow. For every secret unearthed along the banks of the Tippecanoe River, every whispered warning and every act of courage, I have come to understand that redemption is not found in the absence of darkness, but in the willingness to face it head-on. And so, with the evidence in hand and a renewed sense of purpose, I continue my relentless pursuit of the truth, 1 mile at a time, determined to shine a light into the deepest corners of our hidden world.